Now, I've done a lot of cringe-worthy things in my life, and most of them have just revolved around photography, unfortunately. And with the internet being what it is, most of it is probably still hidden online somewhere. So we try to ignore the bad photos. I made a horrendous mistake of uploading an awful photo as an example on F-Stoppers once, and obviously F-Stoppers ranks really highly. So there is a horrendous photograph with a really bad Comic Sans watermark of my website on it, ranking at some ridiculous place on Google, which is deeply embarrassing all the time. Anyway, let's jump into it. These are the biggest mistakes that I made in my first decade as a photographer. So first up, it's believing the hype that your friends and family give you. The good thing about friends and family is that they're nice people, hopefully, and they'll tell you nice things. The bad thing is, a lot of them won't hurt your feelings. I think the only person I've ever had in my life who's been really brutally honest, or two of them actually, is my best friend and my girlfriend. And I remember my best friend once, I said, "Oh, did you see the picture I posted on Facebook?" And he just looked at me and said, "I've blocked you, Scott, to keep your ego in check." And it did. And it really, it's one of those moments where you go, yeah, everyone keeps telling me I'm really good because they're my friends. And, looking back at the images that I was taking back then, they were awful. If I can find some, I'll make them pop up on the screen somewhere. But they were really bad photographs. The editing especially was just horrendous. What I thought looked good back then, I just hope no one would ever have to lay their eyes on today. But that's part of the learning process. And much like with these YouTube videos, I'm banging up every day. I've never done them before. I'm doing 30 days straight. And I'm sure that in 2 months' time, I'll look back on these and go, gosh, they're awful. But we have to start somewhere. So the first big bit of advice to avoid doing what I did is if your friends tell you you're brilliant and you're wonderful, just ignore them completely. Because you say the same to them, I would hope. Next up is my ego and my sort of hype that I build up myself and the way that I believe that I'm such a good photographer. So what I've done here is I've drawn a little graph. Now on this graph, we've got my ability going up one axis and time going along the other axis. Now, when we start out in photography, we're probably slightly better than we're going to be almost immediately after, a bit like driving cars off a forecourt and devaluation. We will suddenly dip in our ability. And the reason is that we start to look at all these random things that don't matter. We find the clarity slider, things like that. And we'll be slightly worse photographers for the first year or so than most people with an iPhone or whatever smartphone you're playing with at the moment. The problem is that whilst you're getting worse, you're believing that you're getting better. And this is a slippery slope. And this is something I fell victim to. I think I thought the most of myself when I was actually the worst photographer. So whenever you're thinking I'm great, that's the time to push on, because when I thought I was great, I was probably worse than when I first started. I was going in a downward trajectory of bad photography. But thankfully, I had no other plans, so I persevered, and I came out the other side. I stopped editing JPEGs in Flickr's editing suite. I started shooting RAW, started using Lightroom, and I started listening to what people were saying rather than going, I know what I'm talking about, I read an article online somewhere. That's the new photography phase. Thankfully, after this, you start to get better. And then all of a sudden, you think you're useless, your ability gets shot to pieces, you drop down again, and when you hit that low, that's the point where you go, I think I'm awful now, but I thought I was much worse a long time ago, and you start to learn. And hopefully from this point onward, it's an upward trajectory. Now, my graph makes it look like it's quite a steep upward trajectory. It is not a steep upward trajectory, it is just an upward trajectory. I would say from year 6 to year 10, it was a very slow improvement. When you're starting out, the first 5 years perhaps, each year it seems like you've just learnt so much, because going from not knowing how to use off-camera flash to using off-camera flash is a huge leap. Whereas going from using off-camera flash to being able to slightly edit it to make it 0.5% better, not such a huge leap, and a lot of the public wouldn't even notice the difference. So controlling your ego and how good you think you are is really important, and this comes down to something I mention a lot, and that's being self-aware. And I'm still working out how to do a video on self-awareness, because it's a really tricky subject, because if you're not self-aware, it's hard to tell you that you're not self-aware. And even if you think you're self-aware, it doesn't mean you are self-aware. Anyway, I'm going to go down a rabbit hole with this. We'll ignore it for now, and we'll move on to the next point. And the next point is something which all of us will fall victim to, and that's gear. When I started out, I couldn't afford the good gear, and I obsessed over the equipment. I used to get shy going to jobs, shooting with cheap cameras and cheap lenses, even though I was the one getting paid. And one of the big things to remember is that when you're there on a job, you're there because you know what you're doing. They're not paying you to have a particular camera or lens. They're paying you to know what you're doing and to be able to produce a shot which fits the brief. And I was so insecure by the fact that I had a Canon 50D, which was like, I think they were grand brand new, but about £300 second hand at the time. I had a Sigma zoom lens, and not the good art kind, the old kind, where they were soft and they didn't focus properly, and they were awful. It sounded like a gear just churning inside it. And I was really paranoid, but I was still getting work, and I wasted days of my life reading reviews of how much better the next lens was. And then obviously when I made a bit of money, I bought all the fancy kit, and I was utterly disappointed, and my photographs were no better. And if anything, they did one of those bits where they dip down to a worse quality because you've got new gear, like when everyone finds the clarity slider and discovers HDR. I had one of those with gear, and I was like, I'll shoot everything at f1.2 and f1.4 because my lenses do that now. It was horrendous. Don't make the mistake I made. Don't obsess over gear. Just crack on with your photography. The most important thing is your vision and your ability to sculpt the light. Anything to do with cameras and lenses, that's like icing on the cake stuff. So don't worry about it for now. Worry about it at about year 8 or year 10. Now, I know that everyone doesn't agree with my next point, but this is that I thought I had to do everything myself. It wasn't until I went on set with a really big photographer who had a lighting technician, a digital technician, an editor, a crew of assistants, stylists, styling assistants. Everyone was there to help this guy press a button. And all he had to do was make sure it looked nice. And that is the role of the photographer. Granted, in different genres, as a wedding photographer, you're not going to have a digital tech on site, but you're definitely going to have an assistant. I couldn't imagine shooting a wedding without an assistant. I would be exhausted. It's not my job to carry, 50 kilograms of gear around for 12 hours. It's my job to take the pictures. So I need someone there to help facilitate me taking these images. And I think as soon as I realised that I didn't have to do everything myself, my photography just really improved quickly. It was the biggest improvement I had was when I started working with stylists, digital techs, retouchers, lighting technicians, lighting assistants, and I had people in there who really knew their little niche of the job, and I could just focus on creating the best image possible. Now, this is a mistake most of us will make, and that's to go too big too soon. We generally feel that we're too anxious to move forward, and we try and keep ourselves in our little bubble, and we don't want to do that. It's too big, it's too hard. And then all of a sudden, we get this sudden bout of confidence, and we go from going, I don't know if I should take this person's portrait, to I'm taking the CEO's headshot of Coca-Cola. I couldn't think of a brand. And then we suddenly go to, I'm taking the CEO's headshot for Coca-Cola for Time magazine because someone in there knows me, they've asked me, and I've said yes. And you suddenly realise when you're on set that you are well out of your depth. I remember the first time I took on a massive job, I had no idea what was going on. I left the pre-production meeting feeling pretty confident because I'd been to loads of them. And I turned up on set with the crew that I'd assembled, knowing that I needed this particular crew, and I was lost. I didn't know who I should be talking to because this agency I was working with, they were much bigger than the local ones around here. They had, I normally deal with a creative director if it's local, whereas when they get bigger, there's just more staff there. And it becomes really complicated, and I didn't know what to do. I started making people drinks because I felt so out of my depth. And obviously they're looking at me going, you're costing us a fortune and you're making tea and coffee. Why are you not getting the runners to do this? I was so out of my depth, it probably set me back 2 years of my confidence. So although you need to get yourself out there, you also need to make sure that you don't bite off more than you can chew. And sometimes, and I have done this much more recently, when I go into a meeting, if I look at the job and go, that looks like a horrendous job, that's going to be really stressful, it's not for me. I don't want to do that. We had a job recently which was abroad with a huge crew. And I just thought, you know what, I shoot abroad, but it's with a small crew, it's a couple of assistants, it's a stylist, prop stylist, it's nothing major, but this was a huge production, and I would have probably shortened my life by 10 years with stress. So I just thought, say no, you're not at that level yet, you need something in between where you are now and that sort of production before you can take it. Don't make the mistakes you made in the past. Don't make the mistakes I've made. Don't bite off more than you can chew. A really big mistake that I made more recently, if anything, is not quitting when I should do. There are certain times in life when you have to quit. And I'm a big believer that quitting is a good thing. Throughout my childhood, I was told, don't quit, stick at it. And I stuck at loads of things that I hated. I was useless at because I thought I couldn't quit. More recently, I changed my niche. I was working as a portrait photographer for nearly a decade. And it wasn't working for me, and it hadn't been working for a very long time. And I needed to make the jump to food photography. And the simple thing of moving food to my opening page on my website rather than portraits was such a big decision that I put off for so long. And the level I work at, people want to work with specialists. They don't want somebody who's a photographer, they want someone who's a food photographer. And even within that, they'll be looking at my particular niche. Now, if I had have changed this niche the moment I knew I should have done, I would be several years further ahead in my career than I am right now. Instead, I hung on to it's this fallacy of, I've invested so much time into this. I shouldn't leave portraiture. I should stay here. It's working for me, kind of, even though I knew it wasn't. And I should have just quit and gone, portraits aren't for me. The whole thing stresses me out to high hell. I'm going to go down the food line. I know it works for me. I enjoy it. I enjoy the working style. I like the clients we have. It's a great way to go. This is what I'm going to do. I should have done that straight away. And if you're sitting there going, yeah, well, I make money doing an event photography, I make money shooting weddings, but really I know what I should be doing is still life product photography. Just make the jump now, save yourself the time. You'll be years ahead of where you would be if you waited until it gets to the point where it's just unmanageable to do what you were doing before. A lot of this you'll look at it and go, yeah, of course, but understanding that you shouldn't be doing it and actually not doing it are two very different things. I've known for years that I shouldn't do certain things in my business, but I still do them. And I know they're wrong, but I still do them. There's things on my website that I look at and I would never advise anyone else to do it because I know it's not the best thing to do, but I still do it. So, being human, it's all part of this. We don't always do the best thing, but hopefully this will at least encourage you or reinforce your thought process that if you're doing one of these things, slide out of there and try something new.